Hello. Today's video might start a fist fight. So, you're welcome. We're talking about Oikos in Paul, or households in Paul. So far, we have seen households in Paul's evangelism, or his church planning strategy, both how he targets households. I hate using target. Both how he attempts to reach whole households and not just individuals, by getting into the household and proclaiming from within, as opposed to dragging individuals out of their family units and wrecking families unnecessarily. That'll happen sometimes, but it doesn't have to be strategy. It doesn't have to happen on purpose. Paul's, and also working with households and through households into cities. We see how in Paul's ecclesiology, his doctrine of the church, there are sort of three architectural levels. There is the global church universal for all time. There are the city churches, all the believers in a city, and they're the church at that city, and then household churches. Re-family, kind of renewed, extended family, or family plus. Family plus people who aren't biologically related, but whom we extend the same love that we would extend to family. We've opened ourselves completely up, made ourselves vulnerable in order to be available. And now we have these socioeconomic units. That's really important, that whole economic piece. Because in countries where the church isn't given tax-exempt status, you can't put up these huge buildings and pay professionals to do your Jesus work for you. You can't. It just doesn't. It doesn't go. It doesn't work. It doesn't happen. And when it does work, when that works, then the work of spreading the gospel through that country stops working. It's never been a good idea. Households, they have their own economic stability. And so all of the church at a city would be all of the stable economic, even poor but stable, socioeconomic units called believing households, networked together for the purpose of blessing that city. When you look at all the metaphors in Paul's literature for church, if you put family or oikos on one side and stack up all the others, the frequency with which Paul refers to the church as God's family or God's household outstrips all the other ones combined. That's really significant. That tells us that Paul thinks of the church as God's household before he thinks of it as anything else. Now, sound doctrine. I grew up in a tradition that really likes sound doctrine. But the thing is, we had to learn what those terms meant. So doctrine, where I grew up, in the tradition I grew up in, doctrine meant things that we teach about God. I later learned it just means teaching, any teaching. Like, for example, the Monroe Doctrine was a policy by President Monroe to only pay attention to the Western Hemisphere and not get involved in issues in the Eastern Hemisphere. That was the Monroe Doctrine. That had nothing to do with theology. It was just, I am saying that this is going to be the way we think about it. So doctrine is the way you think about things. Or it's the way you teach people to think about things. Sound means healthy or whole. I have some boards in my house, in the floor, that are damaged, either insects or water or something. We rent here, so I can't do anything about it. But we would say that the board isn't sound. The wood isn't sound. You can feel the weakness in it. It's going to give way. It can't hold weight. You can't trust it. It's not healthy. It's not sound. Or like in some novels, especially talking about historical periods, you'll hear people refer to not having soundness in their bones, like a bone cancer or an illness that will cause bone depletion, and so it will break. You can't put weight on it. You can't trust it. But when I grew up, sound doctrine meant what we think, how we think about it, right? So the tradition I was in, tongues, healing, anything that couldn't be explained by really science, that's not sound doctrine, because you're reading the Bible and you're seeing it say things like God gives the gift of healing, and to believe that God does is unsound doctrine, right? At the same time, we had opinions that the people who believed in healing would read, that our opinions came from the Bible, and they would read that and say, that's not sound doctrine. Everybody takes their opinion and names it sound doctrine. But their opinion about what? Well, the hot topic theological issues of the day. Whatever the issue is. In Paul's day, it was meat sacrificed to idols. Was it good? Was it bad? And so people would argue about that. How Jewish do you got to be a believer? How much Jewish stuff do you got to do? What about angels? Can we talk to angels, right? And so these are the hot topic theological items for argument. And Paul is going to define sound doctrine in that milieu. For us, it's a different set of arguments, but still arguing, who predestines whom and all that. Still arguing. So take a second, pause, read 1 Timothy, and read Titus. It shouldn't take you long. It'll take you 10, 15 minutes. Just read 1 Timothy and Titus. Here's what you'll find. Did you read it? Here's what you'll find. Paul will define bad teaching, or unsound doctrine, bad teaching, as teaching that leads to arguments. Like where we all are arguing about what's sound doctrine, that's an indicator that we have bad doctrine. He also defines it as being characterized by people making confident assertions about things they can't possibly know. Right? Confident assertions about things they don't understand. Do you understand the cosmic mind of God? Do you understand how God lives inside and outside of time? So if you don't understand that, can you really make a bulletproof assertion about some things? Probably you can't. I can't. I'm pretty smart, and I can't make a solid assertion about things. But when I make a confident assertion about things I really can't know, and then start arguments about it, or get involved in arguments about it, or smile at arguments about it, that's bad teaching. That is, in fact, false doctrine. Oh, that's a fist fight waiting to happen. That's a fist fight. He goes on to define sound doctrine this way. He says, our teaching leads to love, out of a pure heart and an unfeigned faith and a sincere, clean conscience. Holy, sincere love. Look at the people who are being taught. If they're coming out with greater capacity for holy, sincere love, then the teaching was probably sound. If they're coming out angry or really fiercely defending their position, teaching was probably bad because of what it produced. That's what Paul says in 1 Timothy. Then he goes on to say, this is sound doctrine. Okay? I'm going to teach you sound doctrine. I'm telling you this so you can know how to comport yourself, how to behave as the household of God. So two things. Sound doctrine is actually about behavior as God's house. Further, right after that in 1 Timothy, Paul begins a litany of things to do, how to treat people. Here are the relationships he describes. You ready? Men, women, old men, old women, young men, young women, widows, elders, and, rich, poor. You see that? Here are the relationships that are not described. Pastor, worship leader, seminary prof. Are these bad roles? No. Are they necessary? No. Sound doctrine is described by Paul in 1 Timothy as teaching people to inhabit the household relationships in a Christward manner. Christward household relationships. That is how Paul describes sound doctrine. Now, if you actually did what I said and paused and read 1 Timothy and Titus, you will see that that is actually how Paul defines sound doctrine. In Titus, he says, I want you to teach sound doctrine. Okay? I want you to avoid these stupid arguments and this false wisdom where everybody's acting far more intelligent than they are about things they can't possibly know anything about because they're just not God. And then I want you to teach sound doctrine. Here are the next words out of his mouth. Ready? It goes like this. Old men, old women, young women. Money. Remember, Oikos is the extended family plus others, plus the physical plant and the assets of the house's ability to economically get by. So in 1 Timothy, sound doctrine gets described as men, women, old women, young men, young women, widows and elders, money. In Titus, it goes men, women, elders, gospel, money. For both Timothy and Titus, when Paul writes Timothy, who's trying to finish establishing the church at Ephesus, when Paul writes Titus, who's trying to finish establishing the churches on Crete, he says, this is sound doctrine. Teach them how to live as God's household, period. That is sound doctrine, according to Paul. It doesn't get a different definition anywhere. Now, it's not just household, period. It's Christward household. The teachings of Jesus. The teachings about Jesus and the teachings that Jesus taught being lived into the oikos relationships. That's sound doctrine according to Paul. Argue if you want.